All right, we are returning after a weekend, and we are returning to working on Proving Ground number 1 so we can get it submitted today. Now, this Proving Ground combines assignment 1 and 2, right, into one project. So it's also a really good time to improve assignments 1 and 2 and resubmit them. So if I have time, I'll show you how you can use the Proving Ground once you're finished to also isolate your landscape and resubmit that for assignment 1. Isolate your creature, resubmit that for assignment 2, and of course finish up all the rubric requirements of Proving Ground number 1. Proving Grounds are different than assignments. They can be turned in late for credit. You just don't want to forget about them. They are only 1.5 points, but you have to get all of those points in order to earn the Creative Problem Solving badge at the end of the semester. This is one of 4 Proving Grounds we will have to earn that badge. And the way you earn those 1.5 points is, for this project, paying attention to fulfilling the requirements for each of the 3 rubrics, right? So some of them take longer than others. We will go through all of that. But the first one is simply to pick up where we left off. These were our videos. Let's go to our channel on our public YouTube. We are the freeware section, even though Photopea has been down. So we've been needing to do what we usually would do with Photopea with Photoshop. And when they come up in the wrong order, just change the sort to where it sorts them from the time they were added, and I number them. So this is where we went. We did an overview of it last class. We cleaned up and set up our creature from assignment 2, saved it as a cleanly cut out PNG. Then we brought it into our landscape and saved it as a new file that was called Proving Ground number 1. And then we were playing with the size and the placement of that creature in that file. I will find that here in my Proving Ground folder, right? And I just need to open that since I'm not using Photopea. Let's just make sure it's still down just to show you what it looks like when it's down. It just keeps loading forever and never loads. It last worked at 5 a.m. this morning. I know students have been using it over the weekend, so hopefully this won't be a long outage. But what we are going to do now is open this in Photoshop instead. Now, for those of you who really want to have a freeware version of Photoshop to use on your own device, this has to be a device where you have administrative privileges, like your own laptop, where you can install apps. The program you can download for free is called GIMP, G-I-M-P. And you can download it for PC or for Mac. And it is a freeware kind of clone of Photoshop that's been around since the 1990s. The difference between it and Photopea is you have to download it and install it. I can personally vouch for it, though that's not going to wipe viruses from your computer if you get a bad copy. But it's a good program to use. We just don't use it here because it requires that you actually install it. And I don't actually have installation authority on these computers. So we'll just use Photoshop in this lab. But if you want to download GIMP for your own device and not always have to be so reliant on Photopea for free raster imaging, I recommend it. All right, and they are not sponsoring this video. So this is the placement we came up with. I haven't looked at this since Wednesday, and there's a few issues with it. I want to make it look like this guy's flying. Right now it looks like he's trying to stand unsuccessfully on this rock. I could also make it look like he's standing on the rock. I get to just choose these things. Maybe I'll make him standing on the rock. But right now, all I've decided on is how big he is and where he gets placed. But this is where we want it to get to by the end. This is the morning class, right? We want to understand how to make the pose of the creature really match. You see how the feet are in the shadow and there's actually grass between the toes. Like, that's all the kind of stuff we're going to be building. And we do that by compositing in front and making the anatomy of the creature match the setting. And then we play with the lighting on the creature and the coloring of the creature so it matches the setting. We do that through what's called non-destructive dodging and burning. And we do the same thing to the overall setting with non-destructive dodging and burning. And we're going to add atmosphere, which are like clouds that we put in front of everything. If I put it at normal mode at 100%, you'll see it kind of like that. Kind of glazes and puts weather everywhere. So those are the kinds of things we need to add to really make it believable. And that's what we're going to be learning today. So, where can we start? This is the first component needed for our rubric, for our proving ground. We got to do this first, then we can do the other two, no problem. The two things we want to keep in mind. First, we want to angle the creature's anatomy to fit this setting. Now that we know the size of the creature and where they are in the foreground, middle ground, and background, we can think about how their anatomy needs to be angled to make sense. So I'm going to show it in two ways because I get to control the story here. You know, we were playing with different placements last week, but now this is the one that matters. So this is my hero element, my smart object. I'm going to mark it as green. And everything I do now I'm going to do as a duplicate to it. Because in order to change it, I'm going to right-click and rasterize it. So I don't do that on my hero asset. I keep that as a smart object. I do that on a duplicate of it. So I can change things like the coloring, the lighting, but also the pose. So maybe with this first duplicate, I'm going to show this creature flying. And right now it doesn't really look like it's flying. And that's because its feet are like underneath it instead of kind of tucked behind it. So how can I pose the angle of this creature's anatomy so it looks like it's flying through the air and kind of swooping down? Maybe I'll change its head position too, so it's looking at this little village. How I can do that is I can go up to Edit, and instead of the usual free transform tools that we've been using, like warp and rotate and skew and distort, we're going to click on Puppet Warp. And this actually exists in Photopea as well, though I can't show you when it's down. Now what Puppet Warp does, which is really cool, is that it changes the clean layer that's cut out, your PNG, it changes it into having a wireframe polygon map, rather than just the 9 squares from the usual warp. It's like a grommet doll. I believe we introduced this. And so the reason we needed to really understand the anatomy of our creature is you're going to pin it just by clicking with these little thumbtacks on where those aspects of anatomy are. So for instance, the hips, the feet, the neck, the tail, the pelvis, it's all the things I might want to play with. The wings. And it's like pinning a butterfly down. So now if I move the wing, nothing else moves. Right? And I can pose it. So if it's gliding, maybe I want to extend that wing a little bit, and I'll extend this one out a little bit. Right? So it's really catching as much air as possible. And then if I want to tilt the head down, maybe I want to tilt it from its neck down like that. Right? And then most importantly, these feet. Because that tail kind of works. Maybe I can shift the hips up a little bit. But that tail is kind of trailing behind. So that works for the angle of anatomy. But the legs, you know, you don't fly in the air with the landing gear down, right? So you don't want to have the legs like this. You might want to have them kind of trailing back. And maybe I need to put in a knee joint there too. So I can control these things. Have them arch back. And one thing you have to be careful of, we talked about how important silhouettes are, right? As soon as I have one cross over the other, then the next time I puppet warp it, there'll be one element kind of locked together. Because though this pretends it's a 3D element, it obviously isn't a 3D element, right? They're just two-dimensional pixels. So when I overlap it like that, and then I hit return, now when I puppet warp it again, those legs are all going to shift together. You see how they kind of pull each other? I can tuck the hips in. Now these are pretty big legs, but you see how that looks a lot more believable for this creature flying than that. Or before I puppet warped. Here, I'll go to... So once you've pinned it, think of those pins as pins like into a butterfly on a collection tray, right? Once you pin it, you can also move it from the pin by click and dragging the pin. But then it won't move anywhere else you pinned it. So let me show it to you again. If I just say edit puppet warp and I only pin it in one place, like I pin it on the head, and then I pin it at the tail, and then I move it, then it's only going to pin the head, right? So that's why you want to kind of stretch the anatomy, understand the anatomy, and understand where you want to flex it from. Anywhere you pin, you can also move it. But it will keep the other places safe and protected. So you see how the head is moving as I tug at the wing? So it's a really fun way to kind of get the pose. Now if you do it too much, it starts to look really loose, right? So that's why you only pin on joints of the anatomy. You don't want to make it look like it's wet macaroni. So that keeps it rigid, on the rib cage, on the skull, on anything that's a bone that doesn't have a point of movement. All right, so that's one option. Now I'm going to show you another option for posing it, because as long as you can make the anatomy match. So I make another duplicate, and I'm going to rasterize it. Even though you can do puppet warp as a smart filter to a smart object, that takes a lot more processing. It's indirect. So I'm going to rasterize it first on a duplicate. And now I'm going to move this above that rock, so I can see the feet. And now I want to make those feet really grabbing onto the rock, right? So this is on a duplicate. I'm going to label this one blue because it's not my hero asset, which is the smart object. Instead, it's the one that I rasterized and I'm going to use. So now I go to Edit, Puppet Warp. And what I'm going to do is actually just pin the head so I can control where it's looking. And now I'm going to look at the feet. I'm going to pin them. But where possible, I'm actually going to pin the individual toes. So I have full control of posing all of these things. All right, now, first thing I'm going to do, those legs are nicely stuck there, so I can move the whole body, right? Like a bucking bronco. See how those talons are staying put. And I got to decide where I want him to look. I want him to look right there. Okay, now, let's get these feet where I want them. So I've got the head where I want it. So I'm going to push them back and down. Stretch this one out and kind of wrap it around a little. And then when I hit return, I see the difference it made, right? So now it really feels like these talons can clutch into the rock. I'm going to make it more believable, but this is what it was before, right? And that's what it is after. Make sense? So in this way, I can make the angle of this anatomy match my setting. It's being affected by the rock. That doesn't mean I can't just move the whole creature back a little bit if I want to. Or set it on top of the rock. And that might be a little bit better. Yeah, I like that. Okay. So, and now if I needed to adjust it again, I could use puppet warp because I don't like how the tips of the wings are right at the edge. Let's do edit puppet warp. And just like any kind of transform,